The coming of the Ethereals. On the forgotten backwater of Tau, the species first catalogued by the Adeptus Mechanicus grew bigger and stronger, some plains tribes migrating further and further afield and hunting grounds grew scarcer in response to the increasing population. As the centuries passed, each branch of the Tau began developing in their own way, displaying a unique talent for rapidly adapting to their chosen environment. High on isolated mountain peaks, Tau soared on thermals, rising up from the hot plains on thin membranous wings, and found plentiful employment amongst the other Tau as messengers and scouts. Those whose migrations had carried them to lush river valleys began establishing well-constructed farming communities, developing their metallurgical tool-making and mining skills to create the first Tau settlements. Others realized that different communities could produce what they could not and negotiated trade agreements between the disparate tribes, recognizing the inherent value in each other's skills. The larger Tau who remained on the plains grew stronger still, becoming skillful and aggressive hunters. They took what they wanted, and if they had to fight an honorable battle to get it, so much the better. For some unknown reason, technological innovation was at a more accelerated pace than would normally be expected for a newly emergent race. The Tau who had begun building the first communities quickly escalated to use fortresses and simple black powder weapons to defend their settlements from marauding tribes of plains dwellers allied with the Tau of the air. Trade routes were cut, and the Tau who negotiated between the various tribes were attacked to prevent alliances from being formed. Soon, vast intertribal wars ravaged the main continent, with Tau tribes turning on each other in savage battles utilizing primitive firearms. The wars dragged on for many years, thousands dying on every side and with no end to the slaughter in sight. Squalid conditions caused by the fighting and a lack of fresh food and water allowed a virulent plague to spread rapidly across the continent until more Tau were dying of disease than were being killed in battle. As the savagery of the fighting escalated, it seemed as though the Tau race would surely extinguish itself in the fires of its own barbarity. The Tau now entered their darkest age, when the entire race was being destroyed by war and disease. As the 37th millennium drew to a close, many strange portents and omens were observed, such as flickering lights in the night sky and half-glimpsed figures in the mountains. Many believed that these were signs that they were living in the last days. The extinction was nigh. The Ethereals of Phaeton is one of the foremost legends amongst the Tau and tells of how their race was pulled back from the brink of annihilation. The legends tell that on a mountain plateau called Phaeton, an alliance of plains dwellers and air Tau laid siege to the mightiest fortress city of the builder Tau. Nearly 7,000 beings dwelt in the great citadel, and, in vain, the traders attempted to negotiate with the plains warriors. Their blood was afire, and they would brook no settlement save that delivered at the end of a rifle. For 5 seasons, the cannons of Phaeton held the attackers at bay, but supplies were low and disease was rife within the city walls. As night fell upon another bloody day's worth of fighting, the leaders within Phaeton prayed for a miracle. Little did they know that on this night their prayers would be answered. Emerging from the darkness, a Tau of unusual appearance walked into the besiegers' camp, asking to see the army's commander. He was softly spoken, yet it is said that he had an undeniable authority, and the sentries to whom he had announced himself found themselves compelled to escort him to their leader. At the same time, within the walls of Phaeton, a similar individual presented himself to the guards. How he penetrated the defenses of the city he would not say. All he asked was that he be allowed to speak to the castellan of the fortress. Again, his request could not be denied, and he was permitted an audience with the city's leader. Within the hour, the fortress gates were opened, the stranger guiding the citadel's leaders towards the torchlit camp of their attackers. As the gates opened, they were met by a party from their enemy, led by a figure who was the stranger's twin in all respects. The 2 newcomers called themselves Ethereals and bade the others sit. Beneath a maiden moon of purest white, they began to speak, explaining that the talents of each of the tribes could be harnessed. They spoke of a greater good that could be achieved if they would put aside their warlike ways and work together. The 2 strangers talked through the night, their words carrying a great power, and as the sun crested the horizon, a truce was agreed between the warring factions. Phaeton was just the beginning. Soon more of the Ethereals emerged, and the message of peace and greater good began to spread to every corner of the globe, the battle slowly dying out as the new philosophy took hold. Within the space of a year, the wars were over, and the Tau flourished like never before. Well-constructed towns and cities sprang up throughout the continent, commerce routes were re-established by the traders, and communications maintained by the air Tau. The warriors of the plains were the hardest to convince that this was the way forward, but as they saw the civilized wonders being created by the other castes, they finally agreed to the Ethereals and treaties that they became honor-bound defenders of the Tau. It was decreed that from that day forth, each of the tribes would be known by the element that most befitted its role in the greater good. The builders and artisans would be the Earth caste, the traders the Water caste, the messengers and scouts would become the Air caste, while the warriors of the plains would be known as the Fire caste. Having saved the Tau from a slow racial extinction, the Ethereals were revered with the utmost devotion by the other castes, binding and guiding them as they looked towards the future with a newfound sense of hope.